So, the problem with liberal feminism is that it doesn't go far enough. Thank you all for watching. Please like and share and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Okay, jokes aside, I really do think that feminism operating within the constraints of a liberal framework, which I'd say is the most common kind of feminism in the discourse right now, is ineffective. Pink pussy hats might be a morale booster for some, but they don't do much in the way of meaningful policy change. Hey y'all, welcome back to Snarknotes. Today we're going to be talking about, you guessed it, feminism. This episode is an introduction into a series exploring more revolutionary feminist thinkers and theories, and how we should embrace them if we're really serious about equal rights. Some background about me: I had my feminist awakening in college, like a lot of people, because I got exposure to different ways of thinking and talking about gender identity and rights than I ever had in my conservative upbringing. And then 2016 happened, obviously the Trump election, and Brock Turner, and a personal experience I had at Planned Parenthood, and that got me in this fight for the long haul. I was proud to attend the first Women's March of 2017. But each year since then, we've seen the Trump administration ramp up attacks on reproductive rights, immigrants and people of color, and LGBTQ+ folks. We've seen white nationalist violence against the Jewish community and communities of color spike here in the US. And that's only reflective of an international rise of fascist violence. It seems to me that annual women's marches, yas queen girl bosses, and memes of Nancy Pelosi clapping back aren't nearly enough to combat these issues. The biggest problem I have with liberal feminism is its concession to capitalism. It seems to me that for mainstream feminist circles, there's only a superficial recognition, if that, of the idea that capitalism is unhealthy or harmful. It seems like a lot of us can agree that capitalism at least kinda sucks, but then some people will say, but that's the best we got, better go support ethical companies. But other feminists will staunchly defend capitalism. Either way, as a result, there's little to no discussion about how gender and race-based discrimination is also linked to class. Like, we know that women of color experience sexism differently than white women. And I think a lot of mainstream feminists would agree that working class women of color experience sexism differently as well. That is, after all, a factor we acknowledge when we talk about women of color receiving less than 70 cents on the dollar versus men's wages. But then, why does class not feature more heavily into our conversations around feminist advocacy? Because just as race is a factor into how one experiences sexism, so is class. Say you're houseless and don't have access to menstrual products or hormone replacement therapy. Or you're from a developing country and are forced to do brutal factory labor for mere dollars an hour for 16 hours a day. Those realities are an expression of classism, often mixed with racism and transmisogyny. So yeah, I think we do a grave disservice to poor women by not acknowledging how class can factor into how one experiences patriarchal oppression. Honestly, I think feminism and capitalism are totally at odds with each other, and that if you're truly committed to the feminist cause of equal rights for everyone, regardless of gender, then you should necessarily be anti-capitalist. In my video on Sylvia Federici's book, Caliban and the Witch, can y'all tell I really like that book? I discussed how early capitalism entrenched the misogyny and patriarchy peddled by the medieval church and exported it around the world. Capitalism as a system is built on people doing unpaid labor, and that has historically fallen on the shoulders of women and people of color. I mean, we all know that housework and child-rearing are traditionally women's jobs, and while more couples today are splitting that work, the disparity still exists. And of course, there's a renewed push in traditional right and outright fascist circles that women be defined by their ability to breed. That leads to the slashing of reproductive health funding and the peddling of transphobic and homophobic sentiments, policy, and violence. We should also know that capitalism's spread was made possible by colonialism, imperialism, and slavery. The enforced, free labor of colonized and enslaved peoples is what made it possible for early European capitalists and for America's founding class to accumulate wealth. And, as Federici so succinctly puts it, racism had to be legislated and enforced to keep the hierarchy the rich needed to keep exploiting workers, particularly after events like Bacon's Rebellion. I'm just gonna quote Federici again on this. Laws were passed depriving Africans of previously granted civil rights, such as citizenship, the right to bear arms, and the right to make depositions or seek redress in a tribunal for injuries suffered. The turning point was when slavery was made a hereditary condition, and the slave masters were given the right to beat and kill their slaves. In addition, marriages between blacks and whites were forbidden. That racism has been baked into American capitalism. Again, people couldn't have amassed so much wealth in the 17 and 1800s without slavery. And now, present day, Black Americans have still never been paid reparations, allowing the racial wealth gap to grow. White Americans, meanwhile, are overrepresented in managerial and business ownership positions. The original imperialist endeavors of capitalism have been furthered too by modern organizations like the World Bank and the IMF, which I talked about in this video. These bodies forced people of developing nations to comply with capitalism and neoliberal austerity, and if people of these nations rebel, developed nations will find back channels to crush them. See any U.S. interventionist mission into South America and the Middle East, for example. All of this allows private companies like Microsoft, Apple, Nike, and many others to come in and source cheap labor, exploiting workers, forcing them to work long hours for low pay. See where I'm headed? So yeah, it seems that capitalism relies on sexism and racism, and that's a dynamic I hope to explore in this series. And throughout my channel, honestly. I can say with certainty that I don't think minor reforms will fix those aspects of capitalism. It doesn't matter if we have more women sitting on company boards and in CEO chairs, because that does not change the structure of our society or our economy. Rich women, who are often also white, are not invested in dismantling bureaucracy or addressing systemic oppression because they care more about being rich. It may seem empowering on the surface to see a lady CEO, but that woman does not represent the majority of us, of people in the lower classes, of people of color, of queer folks. I'm not only skeptical of the girl boss mentality then, it's also how feminism has been commodified, with self-identifying feminists being turned into a consumer demographic. Like, okay, I went to Hot Topic one time a few years ago to buy some hair dye, and the cashier told me that I had some kind of reward points or whatever, and I, being the awkward goon that I am, kind of scrambled to pick something out of the basket of patches that was right by the register. I found one that said feminist and was like, okay, sure, this'll do. Well, when I got home, I started thinking, man, this is a cheap-ass patch. I bet whoever made it did not get paid enough. And since then, I've been skeptical of mass-produced items that lay claim to any kind of feminism. Because it's a branding thing. Wearing a t-shirt or a patch or something that says feminism is really only for show. And I get it. Sometimes you want to be loud and proud about your beliefs, and I'm not trying to begrudge people for that, because I've been there. I just think we need to be a little more skeptical about that kind of thing, because, once again, it's not structurally changing anything, least of all for the women who are forced to work in the factories that mass-produce this stuff. I want to get back to the Women's March here for a second, because I know I kind of ragged on it earlier, and some of y'all might have been like, what is she talking about? I think marching can be an effective tool of protest, and it definitely has been in the past. But doing it just once a year, it's not enough. It's nice to think that maybe our lawmakers are a little intimidated by it, but as I said earlier, they're still passing anti-choice bills and cutting healthcare and a bunch of other BS. Now, if we could get a nationwide strike going, and sustain it over a period of weeks or months or even longer, that'd be cool. We could actually get some stuff done, and not just on the women's rights front. And voting, too. Given the system we live under right now, it's a thing we should be doing. But it won't save us. It didn't save us from Trump, even though Clinton won the majority of votes. And it's because our democracy is inherently flawed. Because it allows for gerrymandering. Because we don't make Election Day a holiday, thereby barring a lot of working class people from getting to the polls in time or at all. Because a lot of people feel like their voice doesn't matter, since politicians have shown time and again that they won't protect their interests. Because those politicians listen more to the companies and bigwigs that fund their campaigns than the people in the districts they supposedly preside over. So if the Women's Marches got you into feminism and the blue wave of 2018 got you excited and hopeful, that's great. Now let's go further. Let's actually listen to the experiences of women and non-binary folks, and men too, who have been hurt by forces of patriarchal and racist bigotry and violence, and whose suffering has only been compounded under capitalism. Let's prioritize a mindset of constant empathetic learning and growth. I think doing so makes you a better activist. I think, too, that to be a good feminist means to oppose oppression based on gender, sexuality, race, class, and country of origin. We shouldn't be defending capitalism because it was founded on patriarchal, racist, and inherently anti-feminist ideology. We shouldn't be supporting lawmakers who back modern US imperialism and forever wars. And we should support trans people and people of color and working class people, rather than protecting the interests of well-off white women. Of course, a lot of feminists throughout the movement's history have been racist and classist and cis-heteronormative. That includes some of the founders, like Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, etc. But there have also always been feminists who push for a more inclusive and more radical movement. And I have a feeling we'll be talking about that a lot in this series. Thanks for watching, y'all. As always, I really appreciate your time and your support. If you haven't already, scroll down there and tap that like button, and that subscribe button, and even the notification button. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you have a feminist theorist you want to see discussed, leave their name or their works. Thanks again, and I'll see y'all next time.